Right, so that is actually where Impressionism gets its name. It was in a show in 1874. A bunch of folks who had gotten tired of the way that art was typically being presented at the French salons, the kind of the big important show of the year, decided they wanted to do something different. And a critic came by, saw that particular painting by Monet, and actually insulted it by saying that they should call their whole movement Impressionism, because it looked like it was basically just an unfinished sketch to him. But they actually ran with it. They were like, yeah, actually that kind of captures what we're trying to do.
And so tell us about what they were trying to do. How do you see that? How do art historians approach that?
Yeah, so they were very, very modern, and we have a hard time, I think, recognizing that today, just because Impressionism, it's been a while. It kind of seems like a relatively accessible type of art to us now, but at the time they were surprisingly modern. And one of the things that's so interesting about it to me is that they were actually using modern technology as part of their approach in a way that's also like really kind of surprising to us. But if you look at any landscape painting from basically the Renaissance up through about the mid-19th century, it was not actually painted outside, almost no exceptions. Any oil painting, that is, would have been painted in a studio. It would have taken months to create. It would have been something that involved lots of studio assistants. And they actually, this new technology that made this possible to just go out and paint in plein air is so simple. It's just metal paint tubes with pre-mixed paint. Once they had that, they could just go out there. They look a little bit quicker than they really were. They took a little bit more time than maybe you would get the impression to look at, but they would just be able to go outside and paint from nature, something brand new and radical at that time.
Right, because this view in Impressionism sunrise must have been taken from the water looking back at the port, right?
Right, exactly. So this allowed them to do that other really important thing that was so essential to their movement and that makes them so modern. And that also I think we really take for granted. And that is that they're actually painting real life, that they were interested in capturing the real experience of the modern world that they lived in. So if you look at Impressionist paintings, I don't know if you've really thought about this, but they're never imaginary. You're never going to see a historical scene, a religious scene, a mythological scene, all those, the most kind of popular types of art and the area in which they were working. Instead, it's just regular old stuff. It's like Monet, this is not like, this beautiful imagined sunrise, like the most ideal sunrise possible. It's just like what he saw when he went out by the riverside.
Sure, and it almost looks like a fairly industrial setting too. It's not all that sort of picturesque.
Right. There's so many elements of their modern world in their art. It's just like they're going out there using their eyes to capture their reality, not the reality of like careful, painstaking recording like artists might have done 100 years prior, but instead just the reality of like our ordinary visual experience. You go out and you glance at stuff. You don't really sit there and stare most of the time.
So talk to me maybe too about a different kind of painting, like Paris Street, Rainy Day.
Yeah, so that's such a classic example of just exactly what we're talking about, going out into a modern city and just capturing the visual experience of what it looks like. And Caillebotte, the painter of that particular one, was so clever at being able to rope the viewer in, kind of like trick you into feeling like you're not a person looking at a painting, but that you're a person walking down a street on a rainy day. And there's a couple just little visual clues that really help with that. One, he probably actually learned from snapshot photography, which was also just kind of a brand new thing in that time, another part of their modern world. And that is, it's framed in a way that is not clearly composed. People are cut off on the sides, their legs are cut off. It doesn't look like this is carefully arranged, imagined, but instead it looks like you just happen to look up as you're walking down the street. And it's super effective.
Yeah, there's almost like there's an ephemeralness to it, ephemerality to it, right? That these glances are momentary and they disappear, right?
Definitely, yeah. You just feel like you just happened to be passing along and you just caught this little glance.
So, we've talked about two male artists. Are there, who would we turn to for, a female artist working in the same vein?
Yeah, that's actually another of the things that I think is kind of cool that made Impressionism very modern, is that they were open to participants who maybe would have had a harder time working in other of the types of art at the same time. One was Mary Cassatt. who was actually an American. She was from the Philadelphia area, but she did her art training in Paris. She actually excelled. She exhibited with the Impressionists. She was like right up there on the top rung. So this is not like, Impressionism light or anything at all. She is right up there with everybody else. It's cool that she and a couple of other women were able to be part of the Impressionist movement, but it's also really telling. It's interesting because these artists, they just kind of show us, their ordinary everyday life experience. And it's not really meant to be like political particularly. It's not supposed to necessarily have like a social agenda, but still, because everybody has their own viewpoint that is afforded from their place in society, you can tell how her experience as a woman was different than many of her male colleagues. So if you look at an example like this one here from the National Gallery in DC, it is actually just such a mundane, ordinary, just regular subject that you wouldn't really think twice. But the more you look at her art and the more you kind of compare it to her male colleagues, she's not as much going out walking on the street like Caillebotte, or out like on the docks like Monet, or at race tracks or whatever like Degas, but instead she's showing the kind of experience that she had that was much more domestic. And so from their perspective, women really, upper class women in particular, are going to have a life that is much more involved around the home, interior types of scenes rather than out in the city.
It strikes me that I think what gets lost in the century and almost a century and a half since the early Impressionists is this sense of the radical nature of them, right? Because now we think of it, it's kind of been domesticated in a way. Yeah. It's become tame, right?
Yeah, it's funny. It's ironic, that something that was so shocking at the time period, so much negative press. You really had to be like a connoisseur of modern art, basically, to be interested in Impressionism in the 1870s. But relatively quickly, it's accessible. I think part of the reason why is because they really were so good at what they did. And that they were convinced that if you actually just like stopped and looked at the world around you, the things that you don't really pay attention to, those just little momentary passing glances, it's often really astonishingly beautiful. And when they capture those kinds of moments and then just like freeze it in time and then kind of force you to look at it a little more closely because it's there on a canvas, it really is very effective. And the world, that they saw it's a beautiful world.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome.